What's
my
your
problem is
criticism?
that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
and
that?
You know that what he's doing in
I just
imperialism
answered your
and you
question.
don't care.
I just answered your question. And I corrected
Congratulations.
the
You rented your
misstatements that
brain
you made.
to a war criminal pedophile rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal pedophile rapist? Do you brought
Did
up
I
a
stutter?
point? You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. That, excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus generis.
Look at that face. That is not the face of a serious foreign policy thinker. That is the face of a man who just realized the grown-ups are in the room and his Reddit talking points are evaporating in real time. Kyle Kulinski comes in swinging with the classic leftist greatest hits name-calling, conspiracy-level insults, and the usual Trump is a war criminal, pedophile, nuclear option, and Michael Knowles doesn't even flinch. He just calmly picks up the intellectual 2x4 and starts swinging back. If you thought the left's America first means we hide under the bed argument was going to survive contact with actual history, you were about to be entertained.
Well, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act I thought was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's
my
your
problem is
criticism?
that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you
and
say
you
that?
know that what he's doing in imperialism
answered your
and
question.
you don't care.
I just answered your question, and I corrected
Congratulations.
the
You rented your
misstatements that
brain
you
to
made.
a war criminal pedophile rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal pedophile rapist? Do you brought up a point? You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. That, excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did in fact fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Piers, let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know. Whatever his name is.
Well, and that's the
Garcia
problem, is that you're
Rodriguez
advocating for a regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I just said the opposite. I argued against a regime change.
He
Kyle,
actually said the opposite.
I
heard Michael
Knowles. I just want to correct something.
I heard Michael
you said
Knowles say
the
regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little BS.
Yes, but he made the point that the regime is still... He made the point the regime is still there, and the vice president appears to be much more compliant with running Venezuela the way America would prefer for its national security than Maduro. So that's what Michael said. He didn't advocate regime change. So, Michael, let me ask you this, because this point resonated with me this week, which I thought was a powerful one. If America looks like it's just ignoring international law, if it thinks it can just go into Venezuela, kidnap the president, put him in a courtroom in New York, act with impunity, take Greenland if it wants, etc., what is to stop America's enemies using the exact same argument to do what the hell they like? For example, Vladimir Putin must be sitting there going, well, hang on, every argument about why I invaded Ukraine, that's just gone up in smoke, isn't it? I mean, it's the same argument. I wanted to do it. It's in my national security interest. You've got the President Xi probably looking at it going, well, why can't I take Taiwan then? If the Americans can take Greenland because it's in their national security interest, then I want Taiwan. And how difficult does it then become for the West and America leading the West to take any high moral ground or to stop it happening in any way if they've already trampled on international law themselves?
I think that first of all, I disagree with the premise, but second of all, I think my ideological friends on this panel seem to be quite mistaken about a basic premise here, which is they seem to believe that the United Nations or something is what keeps our enemies from running roughshod over the world, American interests and other people's. That's not true. You know what stops our enemies? We do. The might of the United States is what stops us. Now, the reason I disagree with your fundamental premise is I don't think that we violated international law in the removal of Maduro. First of all, the Monroe Doctrine, now the Monroe Doctrine, has been the cornerstone of American foreign policy basically since the beginning. But two, there was a legal predicate for the removal of Maduro that goes back to a court order in 2020. And this has really gone back about 25 years now. Let us not forget it was the Biden-Harris administration and Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who called for the arrest of Maduro and actually offered $25 million to anyone who could advance it. So the only difference between the Republican action here and what the Democrats called for just 1 year ago is that Trump was actually able to do it, and he saved $25 million doing it.
Why
so
should but by that logic,
the argument? That Trump got Biden's policy done.
Well, by that logic, Michael, why should President Xi not be able to go into Taiwan and take the leader and put him in a Chinese courtroom? By that logic.
Can I address that, Piers?
He's got no answer, Piers.
I'm happy to answer.
Well, let Michael answer.
I can stop interrupting before. Yes. So the only reason that Xi has not gone into Taiwan so far is because the United States has told Xi not to. From the point of international law, there is also another confusion because international law is a real thing. Many of my fellow conservatives want to pretend that there is no such thing as international law and that might merely makes right, but that's not true. Law is an ordinance of reason, so we can actually know something about it, and it objectively exists even though it's not material. However, what passes for international law these days, specifically over the last 100 or so years, is a bunch of liberal gobbledygook nonsense, which even my friend here, Kyle Kulinski, points out doesn't work, which is why the League of Nations failed and the UN has largely failed. So there is such a thing as natural law, but it is effected through political powers. And right now, the only thing stopping Xi from going into Taiwan, the only thing that has stopped Vladimir Putin from running roughshod over Ukraine is not some abstract concept in the clouds. It's the might of the United States empire and our allies around the world. And that is what will continue to stop them.
And there it is, the full Kyle Kulinski experience. First, the personal insults, then the war criminal pedophile rapist grenade. Then the sudden expert lecture on international law from a man who 30 seconds earlier couldn't even name the Venezuelan defense minister he's so worried about. Michael Knowles does what serious people do. He corrects the record. International law didn't begin with Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations. It goes back to antiquity. The liberal version of it that Kyle worships already failed twice. The League collapsed. The UN is a joke. What actually stops China from swallowing Taiwan and Putin from finishing Ukraine is not a strongly worded resolution in New York. It's American power, full stop. Kyle's entire argument reduces to might makes right is bad, unless the people I like are the ones with the might. He wants America weak, restrained, and apologetic, while every other major power on earth plays by jungle rules. Knowles refuses to play that game. He points out the obvious. The Biden State Department called for Maduro's arrest. Trump simply did it without spending the $25 million or starting a forever war. That's not imperialism, that's competence. The left's real problem isn't that Trump is using power, it's that he's using it effectively, in America's interest, and without the moralizing lectures they demand. Kyle can keep screaming cuck and meat writer all he wants. The voters already chose the guy who delivers results over the guy who delivers tantrums. And Michael Knowles just made sure everyone watching remembers why.
Michael Knowles, I guess the argument against what Trump is doing is that many people who voted for Trump bought into the concept that what America first was take care of what's happening in your own backyard and stop meddling in foreign affairs. And now they're waking up almost on a daily basis to seeing Donald Trump proudly and aggressively talking about meddling in all sorts of foreign affairs. Is there a contradiction or hypocrisy or even a betrayal of voters going on here?
Not at all. First of all, Venezuela is in our own backyard, and it's been the policy of the United States in 1803 to manage the Western Hemisphere. So that that's a cornerstone of American foreign policy. I think it is charming that Dave is defining America first in the way that he prefers, and I think there are plenty of people who wish to do that. But Dave, though a very popular podcaster, never won a presidential election, and Trump has been clear on what he means by America first, the political movement that he built, that people voted for in his coalition since the beginning. President Trump campaigned the first time around on destroying ISIS, so obviously that does not mean that America is only going to look inward. President Trump has carried out attacks Iraq's military operations that were extremely successful in Iran, in Syria, and Afghanistan, obviously in Venezuela. He's been talking about taking Greenland and even invading America's evil top hat, Canada, though I think he's mostly joking about that one, since the beginning. So that's what that means. And what it comes down to is that America is a global empire. We just are. People can be upset about that, but unless your geopolitics comes strictly from Reddit, if your geopolitics actually comes from history, you recognize that we've been an empire since the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And we've been a muscular global empire since the Second World War. So President Trump's vision, I think, actually rejects two extremes. It rejects a conservative isolationism, and it rejects a liberal internationalism, and it posits a conservative imperialism that says that we are going to recognize our role in the world, but we are going to pursue that role in limited ways with America's interest at heart. So there's been no regime change in Venezuela. We're talking about regime change in Venezuela. The regime is still in place. What we did was depose the leader. We left the vice president in place, and we said, act in a way that is appropriate in accordance with the law and our interests, or we're going to kill you. That's very different than a Bushy-era neocon regime change in Iraq. Even when we're talking about Iran, the Trump administration has not gone in a particularly overt way yet. But even there, we would be talking about a restoration of the Pahlavi regime, most likely, that goes back to 1925. So I grant there are all sorts of risks to interventions, but we're the global empire, and frankly, even the American Revolution comes out of wars of global empire. It comes out of the 7 Years' War, which itself was a derivation of the War of Austrian Succession. To pretend that we don't have a role in geopolitics is to ignore all of American history.
Okay, Kyle Kulinski, I can see you grimacing through a lot of what Michael was saying there. You said Trump says the US will run Venezuela and he threatens Colombia and Mexico. Arrest this psychotic motherfucker. Before I get you to expand on that thesis, the point I was making to Dave, if I want to elaborate on where I sit with this, because I've had a bit of time to look at this play out, is you look at Maduro. Everyone thought, my God, this is going to be World War III. Actually, Maduro is going to end up in a New York courtroom and he's being got rid of. Everyone seems to agree that's a good thing for not just the Venezuelan people, but the world. No American troops died in what was an incredibly efficient surgical military strike to get him out of there. And if you have a more compliant leader of Venezuela, albeit part of the same regime, that can probably only be a good thing. If you look at the argument about Greenland, for example, I've been struck by some of the people that I didn't expect to think this was a good idea. It was a British general last week talking about this, saying that from a strategic security point of view, it would make perfect sense for America to have Greenland. And is there a deal to be done? He didn't think invading it was the right thing, and nor do I. But is there a deal to be done with 60,000 people who live in Greenland that could actually improve the security of the United States and the West against the obvious threat from China and Russia and so on? And I can go through the others. Iran, getting rid of the Ayatollah and the mullahs is unquestionably a good thing for the world. It's how you do these things and whether you plan and prepare properly for what follows next that I think are the debatable points. And history says that's normally, unfortunately, been very badly done. But this is what I meant when I said to Dave that I understand the argument. I may not agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
Michael Knowles just delivered a masterclass in how adults talk about power. While Kyle and the isolationist crowd are still stuck on the fantasy that America first means we pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist, Knowles drops the historical hammer. Venezuela is in our own backyard. The Monroe Doctrine has been U.S. policy since 1823. Trump has been clear since 2015 that America first never meant America alone. He campaigned on destroying ISIS. He took the fight to Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. And now he's dealing with a narco-dictator in our hemisphere who the Biden administration itself put a $25 million bounty on. Kyle's side wants you to believe that any use of American power is somehow a betrayal of the voters. Knowles calmly explains the actual conservative tradition. We are a global power. We have been since the Louisiana Purchase. And pretending otherwise is the geopolitics of people who get their history from memes. Trump is rejecting both the neoconservative nation-building addiction and the pure isolationist retreat. It's limited, interest-driven power. That's not betrayal. That's realism. And watching Kyle's side act like this is some brand new heresy while ignoring 2 centuries of American statecraft is pure comedy. The left doesn't hate the empire. They just hate when the empire is run by Republicans who actually win.